Okay, next up is going to be Eternal Dominion book number 2, Traction, written by Burton Dean. It is, here's the author's description. Xeal and his friends continue their journey to the top of Eternal Dominion. However, as Xeal searches out potential leaders for his guild and bolsters its ranks, others are moving as well. Will he and his guild weather the storm, or will they lose their footing and be stopped before they can even really begin? Yes, I begin to introduce romantic complications in this book. Yes, Alex Xeal's relations will become more complex and integral to the plot as the series goes on. I'm sorry, this is the author's update of the description of the story. He's saying, yeah, there's romance here. There's no smut scenes. I will skip details. So there you go. That's his kind of qualifier. I didn't realize that was part of this novel description. Okay, for me, it's a good story. I enjoyed it less than book number 1. This second book in the series continues the regressor storyline with the main character using his knowledge of the MMO that is sweeping the world to his guild's advantage. This time, the beginning of the conflict is a raid by the opposing dungeon, and how the main character uses not only knowledge of the game circuits and his decades of experience as a guild leader, but also a knowledge of the habits, personalities, and weaknesses of the opposing guild leader. To a degree, things kind of go a little too well for the main character, as there don't seem to be any real challenges for him in the entire story. Essentially he does some training, he does some development of like his guild and stuff in the story, but there's nothing really opposing him this time. There aren't really anybody really standing, and people attempt to. I mean, the guild does. They like opposing faction guilds, but the main character doesn't really seem to have any problem like dealing with them at all. And that's kind of, and for some people that's a real draw. Some people like a overpowered main character story, and this is kind of that to a degree. The main character is using his foreknowledge of things that exist in this newly built MMO universe, because he's a regressor. He's come back. He's reliving his life that he's lived in this world, and so he has these knowledge advantages that he's using while in the story. But for me, I liked a little. I would have liked a little more opposition, a few challenges for him instead of him kind of not coasting through necessarily, but a pretty smooth path at this point. On the game mechanics side of things are the same as they were last time. Still leveling. It's summarized a little bit more as the focus shifts to raising guild members and not necessarily the main character's individual progression anymore. There are a few wand-wavy tricks in the story where the main character kind of pulls these tricks out of his hat at the last minute without properly developing to some degree. But there aren't a lot. There's just a couple moments where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we're winning because of this thing that I didn't necessarily tell you about. And then there's an explanation in the background, like, oh, this is when he did it and set it up. I was like, oh, okay, that's a little one wavy, but it doesn't ruin things for me. The only small complaint I have about the story, and I think other reviewers have had this same kind of complaint, and it's addressed in the novel description, which I thought it was funny, is that in the middle of the story, it kind of takes this jarring turn into harem territory. And as the author says in his novel description, there's no graphic sex scenes. There is talk of sex, and the things that they kind of want to do, but there's no actual description of them doing those things. It's definitely faded black. But the main character definitely takes on 2 girlfriends. And while personally I don't have a problem with romantic development, I thought it was a little sudden. Like, it really does go in the story from one day to the next, where the main character is single and he's just maybe flirting a little bit to him, going out on dates and having sexual relationships with these 2 women. And it just felt like it was this instantaneous progression without any real setup. Especially considering that the main character is a regressor. So in his mind is like someone who's retired, who's like 40, 50, 60, and so when he's regressing back to his body, he's dating teenagers, or, at most, like early 20-ish. And there really is no development for him having this polyamorous kind of relationship. Even in his background, that he's like, I've never done this, I've never really had these relationships, but suddenly he's just so suave and attractive that a women are throwing themselves at him, and it just felt like this huge ramp up of like, oh, that's I guess very sudden. And it almost felt to me like it existed to kind of check a box to some degree, and in the middle of the story, and it doesn't really have much of an impact on this particular story, I should say. So, but it just kind of this weird little side adventure that really was kind of distracting for me, and I didn't enjoy it at all, to be honest. But thankfully, the entire like scene there doesn't take up more than 10% of the story, and so I would just say if you don't like that stuff, skip it. The story picks right back in the action adventure and guild versus guild stuff as soon as that's done. So that while the section did draw down my enjoyment, it didn't ruin things for me. It's just like a section that very skippable for me in the future. If I continue in this series, I'd probably skip all that entirely because it's just not my thing. Overall, good story, although I didn't enjoy the book less than the book number 1. Score 7.4 out of 10 for me. That's Eternal Dominion book number 2, Traction, with a score of 7.4 out of 10.